On the topic of spoilers, this video will not contain any explicit or direct spoilers about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. You can safely listen to this video without worry, but watching may reveal some implicit spoilers in gameplay footage, so do be wary if you have not played.
Dim, dam, dadilam, vacarme, s'en va dans l'oubli éternel.
To head off anything anybody might want to say about whether or not I should be reviewing this game, now about 4 months old, when everybody already knows how incredible it is, I know. Nobody needs little old nobody me with scarcely more than 50 subscribers to tell them that Expedition 33 is good. Dozens of other people way more qualified and almost certainly more eloquent than me have all already done that, and most of them did that several months ago, a feat impossible to me who had nary a moment to myself to even think about playing the game until nearly halfway through June. And that was just to think about playing it. I managed to start on June 7th, but heck if I managed to get any real time in it again for the rest of that month. Anyway, to write a review now where I heap the same exact praise that every other person has already said would be silly of me, and I do not deign to presume I have anything interesting to say in that regard. I'll probably still say some of it in due time, because I don't really have anybody to dump any of those thoughts on in real life, and even I know not to bother my online friends with that kind of nonsense. So, for this hopefully brief-ish review, I'm opting to cover Clair Obscur Expedition 33 in a somewhat different way. I figure that maybe my perspective as an RPG noob of sorts could make for an interesting angle to talk about Expedition 33. I doubt I'm the only person to have my opinion about the broader RPG genre broadly affected by this game, but I also so deeply respect what Sandfall Interactive have done with the game, and they so fundamentally shifted a key portion of my brain chemistry to open my mind to experiences I have otherwise been closed off to for years that I can't not say something about this game as a result. As is, I genuinely fear for my ability to actually say the hypothetically interesting things that may be available to me in this discussion. But regardless of that fear, I'm going to try to pursue my chosen angle of coverage to its end. I aim to not just tell you why Clair Obscur is a masterpiece of game making, like you very well already know it is, albeit a bit briefly, but to also express exactly how that masterclass experience has been important to me personally. I aim to put into words the exact way in which Expedition 33 manages to be a reality check, and not just a reality check for the games industry broad scale like is downright certainly going to be true. No, this video was a reality check for me. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a deeply affecting game for the vast majority of its player base. You no doubt already know this. My time with the game reminded me of how impactful a great story and great writing can be, and reminded me as such in ways reminiscent of the first game that I can think of to have made me cry, The Last of Us, which remains, to this day, my favorite game of all time. In fact, there are a couple interesting parallels between these two games that really necessitate that comparison, which we may discuss in due time. But more than that, Sandfall's ambitious and ballsy debut title reminded me of how important being a great video game can be, and used that angle to upend and retool my approach to gaming as a medium entire. I merely hope that I can find the right words to actually say that, and fear that I have not. But nonetheless, let's talk about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I am not a gameplay-forward gamer, for all of the irony inherent to that statement. I come to games not just as gameplay experiences, but also as stories with characters and writing to be affected by. I play almost exclusively single-player story games, or rather, the gaming experiences that define the hobby for me are pretty much entirely made up of those types of games, and Expedition 33 is merely one of the titles in that list. For me, it started with The Last of Us and God of War 2018, and then I turned to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Spider-Man 2018, Detroit Become Human and Beyond Two Souls made their ways into the rotation, and I fairly shortly after got around to some Uncharted and BioShock, and these experiences defined my early personal gaming tastes. All this to say that oftentimes I care more about a game's story and or writing than I do its gameplay. That's obviously not to say I don't care at all about gameplay. I merely bring this up because I am willing to rough through some mediocre or even kind of bad gameplay if the story is good enough. So RPGs are an entirely different beast in my mind. Why are RPGs an entirely different beast? Well, probably because they are very gameplay forward as a rule, and are so in a way that kind of scares me. Now, obviously, it would be wrong to assert that RPGs are never about stories or characters. I mean, many of the most renowned RPGs are renowned for said stories and characters, games that have very well-crafted dialogue options, choice and consequence, world reactivity, things that require a pretty deft writing hand to get right. Think of most of BioWare's games like Knights of the Old Republic or Baldur's Gate. Some of the Fallout games from Bethesda and other studios, particularly New Vegas, as I've heard from Obsidian, and no small number of action RPGs that blend RPG elements into something more somewhat inherently narrative forward, like, to rely on BioWare again, Mass Effect, or Bethesda's The Elder Scrolls, and no small number of other titles that I am just forgetting off the top of my head, thanks in large part to my unfamiliarity with the genre. Put simply, story and writing is not a focus in this genre of game. These things are not mutually exclusive, but RPGs are still about the gameplay in ways that simply intimidate me. I'm a pretty basic bitch in regards to the games I enjoy and play. Some measure of linearity can be common, but being able to easily see and do everything, perfecting the gameplay in a sense, is usually something I can do in one playthrough. In fact, I rarely do multiple runs in games just because I have no reason to do so until I want to re-experience the story. In fairness, this still occurs sooner and more often than most other people do, probably, but that's somewhat besides the point. To keep it simple, if a trophy list calls for New Game Plus and that's the only remaining trophy I need, I'll consider it for that sweet platinum, but usually I'll 100% and then disappear. I'm able to do this because most of the games I pick up are not built to be replayable the way that it seems most RPGs are, at least not the good ones anyway. Replayability to test other builds, take other story paths, other dialogue options, simply to just do something different with new tools that you haven't really tried out yet. This is a hallmark of the RPG genre. My playstyle is pretty antithetical to this. Even the games I do play still usually have some things that I can do differently. You know, weapon options I can change and the like, but they're usually simple things like this. Things that, at the end of the day, I'm just picking the same build no matter what else I do. The general ethos remains the same. The handful of games I have played that do allow for adaptable playthroughs, I am unreasonably and unfortunately a very rigid player, and I do the same thing over and over again. I'll play the same game over and over again and do absolutely no different, even if I have every intent to switch things up at the offset. Yeah, I know, it's a me problem, but then that is the entire point of this section. Long story short, I'm not really a very expressive player as a gamer, usually allowing myself to be given a playstyle to figure out and sort of perfect, but never branching out unless I'm given explicit reason to. Frequent players of RPGs, however, I suspect, are precisely the opposite. Gamers for whom this is their genre, I feel like, are supremely likely to play a game to its absolute limit, doing any and every build that interests them, trying to do as much as what is on offer solely for the fun of that experience. The story incentive may still be there in plenty of cases, as said before, but I get the impression that probably most RPG players are fanatics because they love creating characters and being able to approach different scenarios however they want to. They want weapon and class and dialogue and quest options that dynamically reshape and retool their character and approach and their place within it. That kind of thing. That may not be entirely accurate, but I'd be willing to bet it's not wrong either.
We sewed up the sleeve so you don't have to keep rolling it up.
You guys know how to sew.
Sophie helped us. Turns out it's not that hard.
Legacy can take many forms.
Yeah.
You taught me.
Right.
There you are. You can't hide from us, you know. Like I said, morning's best done with friends.
Ancien.
What? It is.
So why do I bring all this up, actually? Well, because you'd probably expect that what Clair Obscur Expedition 33 did for me was primarily on a storytelling and writing level. That is certainly true for no small number of other people. Because, really, what is there to say about the story other than that it is so astoundingly deep, and surprisingly so? What you take for something simple unravels into something so much more complicated as time goes on, and then Act 3 decides to flip the table over completely. Nothing about the story or world of this game is what I thought it was at the start, yet it is all so obvious? At the time of writing, I only started New Game Plus through the prologue to get one last trophy for the platinum, but opted not to replay the rest of the game yet, due mostly to lack of time. But the amount of things I could so clearly see I missed the first time around just made the depth to everything the story has going on that much more obvious. As I said at the start, I'm not going to spoil the story or anything like that, but there is actually so much about this experience that I was surprisingly not wowed by until suddenly, with the snap, I was. The prologue made me cry, both times actually, so not too unlike The Last of Us in that way, which I mentioned earlier, and the end just absolutely devastated me. I still don't know about my decision in the end. If you know, you know, but knowing the alternative doesn't make it any better, to be honest. This is just a rare instance of a game where I sympathize with every single character. Not a single one has bad motivations. They are all equally correct and incorrect. It's truly incredible. But yeah, even when I thought the story was good otherwise, it was really just turn on a switch moments that made everything so impactful. But anyway, tangents aside, the story isn't actually what had the biggest impact on my actual gaming life in the case of Clair Obscur. While it is still very impactful, and while I could make a video analyzing that alone, this is not the point of this video. Everybody already knows, and there are plenty of other story-based discussions about the game. The horse is not quite dead, but I still don't need to beat it any more than it has already experienced. We all already know that Expedition 33 broke an entire generation with its story. But that's not all it broke. As established, I am a story-forward gamer. Although I do occasionally love games for the games that they are, and rightfully so, and although I do also occasionally buy games motivated primarily by what the gameplay experiences promise, it is the simple truth that that is not often the case, until recently. But let me back up, briefly. When the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters came out a number of years back, I decided to grab them. Around the same time, I also decided to purchase all the other mainline Final Fantasy games, plus direct sequels. Something about wanting to try Final Fantasy was just in my blood at the time, and I eventually did try the very first game. That quickly became a 100% playthrough of the first 3 games, more or less back to back, and while I have not yet continued those games, aside from recently recording Final Fantasy I for a Let's Play, which is currently ongoing, publishing every Friday until mid-October on this channel, they did absolutely crack my aversion to turn-based combat systems. That topic is an entirely separate video, but it is also relevant because Final Fantasy is, of course, perhaps the most recognizable name in JRPG history. Emphasis on the RPG. Those early games aren't the most sophisticated RPGs out there, but they certainly introduced me to what some of the main genre conventions are in a way that nothing else had for me at the time yet. Whatever RPG light mechanics other games had that I had played, like the stats and upgrade systems of the Dad of War games or the very, very loose weapon and armor systems of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I'm aware scarcely even counts at all, even if it is arguably the most RPG-like that series has ever gotten. Regardless of some of these systems, I had still never seen true RPG mechanics. Any games I had played could have been considered character action RPGs at best, for the most part. So anyway, for the sake of simplicity, we'll say that Final Fantasy broke the ice for my relationship with RPGs. Even so, I have remained fearful of the genre, intimidated by it, because of the sheer amount of options that most games provide. Additionally, the fact that you can't do and see and be everything in most good RPGs in one playthrough has scared the completionist in me. As a result, I simply haven't played many of them. I had hardly even bought many for the most part either. FromSoft games, Souls-likes and whatnot, were maybe the only notable exception for a while, and even those aren't the strongest of RPG experiences outside of character stats. But in comes Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I most certainly did not love Expedition 33 the way that I tend to love most games. I expected to come in and be slapped around by the story a bit. That much certainly occurred, and while the particular reveals of the story itself surprised me, the fact that it did not in itself surprise me. After all, I was suffering through like 60 to 70 hour IRL work weeks when the damn game released, and I was stuck with that schedule for over a month afterwards, and I also had all of my time not spent at work wrangled up in other freelance work I was doing at the time. I simply did not have the time to even think about playing Clair Obscur for a long time after it dropped. That was something that severely disappointed me. What sort of sucked, not that bad, but still, was that when my time did free up, when the overloaded work schedule let up and my aforementioned freelance project was complete in the first week of June, I went on vacation, one I had scheduled long before Expedition 33 even released. So the wait for me was even longer. But more to the point, the fact that the story was wowing other people was to be expected by the time I got to it, hence why it did not surprise me that it was so good. In either case, I balanced the remainder of my time at work for the rest of June with projects as best I can, and I started the game when I came back from vacation. After some notable spaces of time spent on video projects and the like, and other projects getting in the way, I kinda played on and off until the end of July, where I spent the entire last week of the month binging through Act 3 and the rest of my 100% run. What an experience that was. But to get to the point again, and my apologies for how incoherent this has been up to this point, the thing that struck me the most about Expedition 33 within the first handful of hours of gameplay, and the thing that made me the most excited about coming back to it whenever I had to break away for a time to work, much to my surprise, it was the combat. Okay, so I know this video isn't exactly going to be short, and certainly not as short as I had hoped. Classic KC move right there, but I'm going to try to keep this section shorter than it otherwise might be. Just as on the topic of the story and the writing, there are plenty of other people who have already analyzed the combat and other gameplay systems of Expedition 33 to high heaven in 4 months. I don't need to explain the little details of everything, so I won't, and I don't even think I could if I tried. What I want to do instead is to try to express how much the systems deeply engaged me, far beyond what I had imagined, anticipated, or even currently understand to a degree based on everything I've said and implied about not really focusing on gameplay and not being super inclined towards experimentation. The magic word in the case of Clair Obscur is this: synergy. Everything about combat is based on synergy. Intra-character synergy is the first thing you come to learn as you come to grips with each character's unique kit, but the further you play, and thus the more familiar you become with each character's strengths, then you start exploring quite freely with inter-character synergy. Each step of the way you get to feel every single thing expand, just a little bit more, and it is so awesome. So let's start with intra-character synergy, or synergy that occurs within a singular character's build. The best example of how Expedition 33 does this brilliantly, in my opinion, is Lune. Her kit is built rather inherently towards building and maintaining a circular chain of skills that is just so fun to gear up and work with. You get stains for every skill you use, which you can use to enhance other skills, rotating through a circle of them in particular orders to just make something beautiful to play. It's an absolutely lovely system that shines the most in the mid-game when enemies have enough health for you to get several turns with each party member, but before your party starts getting really OP with Pictos and Luminous. I definitely had the most fun using and adapting Lune's kit as the game went on, and she was the foundation of my party build for a long time. Another great example of intra-character synergy is Mael, though perhaps a bit more subtly. If you use the weapon that starts her off in Virtuoso stance, and have a set of skills that allows you to bully your enemies through that inherent 200 damage boost without ever properly losing the Virtuoso stance, you can do hella numbers with her. Mael was easily the most reliable 9,999 damage character for me no matter the scenario, leading up to getting the Pictos that allowed for characters to do more damage than that in a single hit, and when I saw what my characters were maxing out with in their builds after that point, well, let's just say it was absolutely unquestionable that Mael would never, ever leave my party, not that she ever did before that anyway. When I play this game again and finish my New Game Plus run, she stays, period. These two characters, just being able to play them in every combat encounter for damn near the entire main story, they made me excited to play Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Genuinely excited. I'm not the type to get excited about gameplay this way at all, but learning the intricacies of the systems at play and how I could use things to my advantage was a rare case of a game habit that I do not typically have. The other characters have pretty solid and diverse kits as well, and the diversity of each character's set of skills in and of itself is a huge boon on the game's design, if I may add as a side note, but Lune and Mael really shine the brightest in their internal synergy systems that were readily apparent even to me, who is far from a min-maxer. But speaking about min-maxing, let's move on to inter-character synergy, which is when things get absolutely crazy in the endgame. Furthermore, this made me even more excited simply to think about the game when I had to pause after Act 2 for work because there was so much possibility there. Beyond synergy, possibility is the secondary keyword in explaining what makes the combat model of Expedition 33 really click into place. It is limitless, and I mean that pretty much literally. I mentioned Pictos and Luminous earlier. Well, these are basically power-ups for your characters. You get certain stat boosts from the 3 Pictos you can apply to your character, but they do so much more than that. Everything from simple damage boosts in particular scenarios to setting up basically macros to get some pretty unbelievable performance out of your party is available to you. Read the descriptions and stack some things together, and I really do mean stack. Everything stacks in this game. Anyway, so you can learn any given Pictos by winning 4 encounters with one applied, and this makes it possible to apply each individual one using Lumina points on any character at all. You can just keep on giving your characters an absurd amount of Lumina points, which allows you to keep applying more passive Pictos on top of one another, and this is where inter-character synergy really starts to rear its head in incredible ways. Of course, this has an impact on the intra-character synergy because you can make one character's build all the more overpowered in and of itself, but there is so much more possibility than just that. Certain character skills can affect and buff other characters. That's where that side of synergy comes into play, but the Pictos is what brings it all together, because you truly build your characters to just be able to do whatever in whatever case you need them to do it. In the endgame, I learned that Ciel, who I just struggled to grasp in the intra-synergetic sense, meaning I did not use her much in combat despite what by all means seems to be a really cool and great kit on offer. I learned she happens to have a really great set of support skills, most notably being able to buff another character's next attack by 200%. This combined with Mael starts to give you some absurd stuff. This is really my case in point for inter-character synergy. Once you have a couple characters geared towards a support DPS combined system, or even set to really play off one another intricately, as I can tell various pairings allow for, you can just do so much with what this game offers you. I know that basic rundown was probably not great, but the gameplay is simply too complex for my pea-brain to explain, but what I want to say is that synergy and readily clear possibility made this experience something special for me. You might recall that I said I do not have a tendency to min-max. This goes hand in hand with my tendency to just kind of play the same thing every time I play a game, and furthermore to stick with whatever I've got going if it works, regardless if I could technically improve it. Expedition 33 retroactively kicked me in the skull for this stupid, silly habit of mine by encouraging me through the most natural means to simply imagine what I could do with what I was offered. For perhaps the first time in my life, I started to min-max. Now, I did not develop things to their furthest possible end, nor did I break the game the way that you need to in order to defeat the 2 major final super bosses in one shot all by myself. I used a build guide to do that after proving to myself privately that I could fight them legitimately, but just did not have the extra day or two to perfect parry timings or whatever else. But everything else I did all on my own, and I did not actually fully maximize my build anyway. That's something I intend to do legitimately on finishing my second run, you know, completely re-rolling the Pictos and Luminous on Mael in particular to get the most out of her that I can with the build that I had developed. It was just so much more fun than I expected it to be, just sitting in my menus trying to determine the best ways to get the most damage out of my Ciel-Mael pair that I possibly could. It was certainly, without question, the closest I've ever come to properly min-maxing a video game before in my life. I don't think I ever will again, but I can tell that this experience was an important one for me regardless. I titled this section Breaking My Fear of RPGs. Expedition 33 did this by showing me that engaging with complex gameplay systems to get the most out of a diverse set of options is actually fun. It did this by showing me that I could have fun without sacrificing on my playstyle either. It showed me that I could do whatever I wanted, explore my options, experiment a little bit, and that I don't need to feel bad if something isn't working out. I mean, I rarely had anything satisfactory with Minoko, for example, and did not naturally come to any manner of build with Gustav or Verso that came close to really shining like I inherently know they can, nor did I really get Ciel's kit until I chose to focus on her support skills in accordance with the rest of my party instead. I learned that I don't have to be scared of RPGs just because of their complexity. I learned that RPGs aren't trying to limit me by making me really pay attention to the systems that blanket the experience's broad scale. I learned quite pointedly that the freedom that RPGs generally tend to provide on a gameplay front is not without its limits, and that those limits make the experience worth playing. Sure, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is perhaps a little unique in that it kind of begs you to completely break everything and totally allows for it, but I think by fulfilling that request, I also broke the intrinsic barrier that playing other games in the genre has kept me at bay with. But now I come to what I'm going to go ahead and make the end of the video, solely for the sake of my being able to complete this video on time without killing myself in the process. I can't say I intend to play many true RPGs in the near future, but I have over the last handful of months bought way more than I think I will ever be able to make time for, both modern and classic, and everything in between for that matter. There are so many RPG experiences I now actively want to have and am excited for, despite my previous trepidation with the genre, and I really do have Expedition 33 to thank for a massive part of that. I could also thank Mortismole Gaming, since his focus on CRPGs specifically has given me a treasure trove of videos to listen to while working the last couple of months. His videos inspired no small number of the RPGs that I have purchased as of late, for better or worse. I mean, my view of RPGs has changed so drastically in the last few months that I now have a big desire to play a solid chunk of the ones I'm most excited for in some form of Let's Play or live stream context, specifically to be able to call them JRPG noob plays, or CRPG noob plays, or RPG generally noob plays, or whatever other applicable name I could come up with, because I am suddenly excited to experience so many games that I previously had no interest in or scarcely even knew about in the first place. I feel like my entire perception of video games as a medium has been radically altered this year, and that's honestly been really cool. It was certainly unexpected, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. Thank you to Clair Obscur Expedition 33 for opening my eyes a little bit. Thank you to Sandfall Interactive for producing perhaps the most memorable title of this generation, or of the decade, arguably even this century. This is surely not an experience I will forget. This game will hold fast to my soul and to my memory, and it will certainly haunt me just as much as it comforts me for as long as I live.
Old friend, you've traveled miles, spinning in circles, your blind eyes on the dial, stripping out the colors. A man whose steps leave no trace. A man whose voice sounds like tears. A man whose memory is not in vain. that matters remains. But it's time to say goodbye until next life. A man whose steps leave no trace. A man whose voice sounds like tears. A man whose memory erases. A man whose time flow of being.